Links to previous episodes are given in the video description, so don't forget to like, subscribe and share the video. Mercy of the God of War. Episode 15. Both sisters started checking the whole room, until finally they found it. This one was actually on the floor, hidden under several piles of heavy rugs. Miss Andra and Cassandra quickly worked together to clear the way to their escape route, both keeping an ear out for what was happening on the other side. They could hear the dragon's growls every now and then, but it seemed further away from their current position. Cassandra wasn't even able to think, at the moment. She just focused on getting to that exit, and silently prayed for Lady Corrine to be all right. Finally, they cleared the path, but just as they were about to get in, someone slammed on the door. Here. There is some secret entrance. Cassandra froze. They were just about to get out. Within a split second, she made her decision. She threw the bag at Miss Andra and pushed her sister towards the opening. What? Cassandra. We don't have time to both leave. Take the bag and meet me outside the palace. But, Miss Andra, I don't have enough time to get in, and if I do and they forcefully pull me out of there, I'm afraid they'll hurt me and the baby. Don't worry about me, go. You're tiny enough, you can escape and I'll close it behind you. You. I promise I'll find a way to leave, but if they catch you, Vrihan can kill you on the spot. He can't kill me inside the Diamond Palace, there are too many witnesses. Linyu, I promise I'll find a way to get out of here. Now, go. Miss Andra hesitated, but another violent slam resonated from the door, and no matter what, it was now obviously too late for Cassandra. She bit her lower lip and squeezed through the little opening. As soon as she was in, Cassandra pulled the rugs next to her, making a pile collapse to hide it. If they found her here, with the first entrance exposed, they wouldn't think of looking for someone else through a second exit. She took a deep breath, and retreated to the back of the room, waiting for the door to be broken open. It only took a few more seconds, then soldiers barged in, yelling and grabbing her forcefully. Who were you talking to? Let me go. I was praying, now let me go. Your Highness. We found the criminal. Cassandra kept thinking of a way to free herself without struggling too much and risking getting hurt. However, both men were obviously stronger than her, and she couldn't find a solution before Vrihan arrived with his sister a minute later. Lady Corrine was there, too, and she became livid when their eyes met. Let go! How dare you brutalize a pregnant woman, she roared. Who cares, hissed Fitra. She's a criminal. She is a suspect, and she carries a dragon prince, too, yelled Corrine. Even if her shouts only angered Fitra more, the Imperial concubine's stance was enough to terrorize the two guards holding Cassandra, as they realized she was right. Despite their master being right there, they both eased their grip on her arms, their face a shade paler than before. Meanwhile, Cassandra was trying to assess the situation as quickly as possible, despite being scared. Because the corridor they were in was rather narrow, there were only a dozen guards, plus Vrihan, Fitra, and Corrine. No large dragon could squeeze in there, and Srai was probably hiding somewhere. Cassandra was not a fighter, but she was sure of one thing: if she left the Diamond Palace with the second prince, she wouldn't be able to survive. No matter what, she had to find a way to escape before they brought her out of the palace and Karin's protection. I wonder why a suspect was hiding, hissed Vrihan. Who said I was hiding, Your Highness? This is a storage room, I had come to look for some fabric, replied Cassandra. She wasn't used to lying through her teeth, but those few weeks with Karin had taught her a couple of things. The prince was obviously glaring at her round belly, and Cassandra really felt uncomfortable under his murderous stare. You asterisk, said Phaedra. You look like you're doing well, Your Highness, retorted Cassandra. That was an obvious lie this time. Phaedra still had bandages all over, and some large scars on her body. She had obviously been in a lot of pain, but if she angered her, Cassandra was hoping to win some more time, or create an opportunity that would allow her to escape. However, she didn't expect what happened next. Phaedra stepped forward, with a little smile. Oh, you think so? Then, she slapped Cassandra. The slap wasn't very strong, but if she hadn't been held by the two men, she might have fallen down. Phaedra was smiling wide, but behind her, Karin went mad. You crazy! How dare you injure Cassandra, the war god's favorite? In my palace. Injure her? This was merely a little slap. With that, Phaedra slapped Cassandra a second time before Karin could react, on the other cheek this time. Cassandra felt the pain resonate from her cheek through her whole body. Even her baby reacted, kicking her stomach. A strange worry crossed her mind. Was her baby feeling her pain? Was he okay? She could handle a few slaps from Phaedra, but if anything happened to her baby... Phaedra, enough! Stop it, yelled Karin. What? Does it hurt? I think she needs another one. However, to her surprise, someone pushed her away from Cassandra, taking the slap a second later. The princess was so surprised that she stepped back, looking at who she had slapped this time. Dahlia! Exclaimed Cassandra. Her handmaiden was standing in front of her, in a protective stance. Cassandra had no idea where she had come from, but the young maid was obviously resolved in protecting her at any cost. Please don't touch her, she claimed, despite shivering in fear. However, Phaedra was too furious to listen to the young servant at the moment. She glared at her. You want to protect her, you little rat? You think you can oppose me? A red flash appeared in front of Cassandra's eyes. She didn't understand what had happened. Dahlia collapsed at her feet, her eyes opened wide in surprise, her throat sliced wide open. Cassandra's ears went deaf, and she started feeling numb. She wanted to scream, but no sound came out of her mouth. She couldn't speak, only watch the girl dying at her feet. Somehow, the rational part of her brain knew that this was not an injury anyone could heal from. It was cut wide open, and bleeding way too much, way too fast. The shock got her completely numb, her blood leaving her face, and she didn't even react to what happened next. It wasn't until Phaedra screamed that she looked up. Vrihan had brutally grasped his sister's throat, throwing her to the ground, and it was her scream of pain that made Cassandra come back to her senses. I said not to kill anyone yet. Are you so stupid that you can't understand such orders? He yelled. His brutal yelling surprised Cassandra, and she looked their way, still stunned, barely understanding what was going on around her now. Then, Vrihan brutally kicked his sister, who was already on the ground. The incredibly violent situation gave Cassandra another shock, waking her from her slumber. She had never seen Vrihan being violent before, but he kicked his sister's injured leg twice, making her scream in pain. "Brother, stop it!" she screamed, tears running down her face, terrorized. "Stop it, please! You can't kill me, brother! I know your secret! You can't kill me! I will kill you if you disobey me again, you useless!" Cassandra felt like she was dreaming. The two siblings she had always seen as perfect accomplices were fighting, and Fitra was crying on the ground, next to Dahlia's dead body. This was so unreal. This had to be a nightmare, one she was going to wake up from. This only lasted a minute, however. Vrihan stopped kicking his sister, out of breath, and glared at her one last time before taking a deep breath, returning to his normal stance. Cassandra had never seen a scarier attitude than that. He was abusing his own sister just a few seconds ago, but now, he was turning to her, looking perfectly calm and composed. This man was worse than a monster. "Now, enough of you women, fighting. You're coming with me," he hissed at her. After that scene, there was no way Cassandra was going with him. She was terrorized, in shock, but her survival instinct was screaming in her head, telling her not to go with that man, no matter what happened. She couldn't get the vision of Dahlia's death out of her mind, but now, her eyes were focused on Vrihan's hand, which was coming close to grab her. Cassandra retreated, even pulling the two soldiers who hadn't expected her to resist, with her. "Don't touch me," she said, with a cold voice. Her emerald eyes had never been so determined, so defiant. Even the prince was shocked for a second, but soon enough, Vrihan frowned. "Don't you dare oppose me, you star dot!" He tried to extend his arm to grab her again, but just as he reached out, a white shadow brutally jumped from behind Cassandra. It took a quick leap onto her shoulder and pounced on the prince's arm. Vrihan screamed and stumbled back as horrifying sounds resonated in the room. Blood splattered, the flesh brutally ripped open, and as he pulled back, his hand was covered in blood, some fingers missing or chunks ripped off. Cassandra looked down, but whatever it was had just jumped in a flash onto one of the soldiers holding her, attacking him violently. The small creature was biting the man, and growling furiously. The other soldier let go of her arm, terrified, while Cassandra looked down at it, speechless. When the man stopped moving, the little dragon turned its head towards Cassandra. Its two big emerald eyes stared at her for a second, and, without warning, it jumped towards her with a cute little squeak. Cassandra barely had time to open her arms and receive it. It was so heavy. However, she was more stunned by the gorgeous, adorable, silver-scaled creature in her arms, rubbing its little head against her chest. The little silver dragon was growling softly, just like Cray would do whenever she was scratching its snout. "Oh, by the Lord! Don't tell me you're the baby dragon," whispered Lady Karine, on the verge of tears. "He hatched already? To protect his mother?" Cassandra was rendered speechless. Her baby dragon was in her arms. Now, when had it even hatched? Was it because of the slaps earlier? Or, because her baby had felt her fear? She kept staring at the adorable creature in her arms, growling softly and rubbing its head against her chest innocently. In front of them, Vrihan was holding his head, covered in blood, looking at the newborn dragon with a horrified expression. No, no! Capture her! Now! Cassandra, go! Yelled Karine. The Imperial concubine's voice was what Cassandra needed to wake up from her inner turmoil of emotions. There were so many things going on, but for now, she stuck to the one thing she had to focus on, escaping Vrihan's grasp, no matter what. She turned around and started running, despite her heavy belly. The baby dragon jumped out of her arms to follow her, jumping around, almost looking excited. Cassandra heard Vrihan yell orders somewhere behind her, but she didn't listen. All she needed was a way to leave the Diamond Palace and hide. She had to find Missandra and escape at all costs. Her heart was bleeding for poor Dahlia, but she couldn't stop to mourn her friend now. She trusted Lady Karine to take care of her. Moreover, she had other problems now. She could hear the soldiers running after her, and Vrihan's voice still shouting orders. The birth of the baby dragon had apparently made the second prince absolutely furious. No wonder. He had been on the verge of killing Karen's pregnant concubine, but now, she was about to escape and have this baby. That sole thought motivated Cassandra more than anything. The baby dragon's birth wasn't a coincidence, her baby was going to come out soon, and she would do anything to protect her child. However, she was still heavily pregnant, and unable to run fast enough to escape anyone. She needed a way out, quickly. She was already deep inside the palace, where could she escape to now? Cassandra found the solution after recognizing one of the corridors. It was a bit of a crazy idea, but it was the only way out she knew of, and the only way that neither Vrihan nor his soldiers would be crazy enough to follow her. Just as she recognized the door she was looking for, one of the soldiers grabbed her. Not for long, though. The baby dragon furiously jumped on the man, attacking him ferociously. Cassandra heard the man's screams, but she couldn't look, as she was busy opening the doors. The large room finally appeared in front of her, with her way out. She had returned to the infinity pool room. The wide pool in front of her, Cassandra walked in quickly. She heard the man hurrying behind her when the water was already up to her waist. "Baby! Come!" The baby dragon immediately dived in the water, not looking afraid at all, and disappeared under the surface somewhere around her. Cassandra didn't have time to check where it had gone to. The men were starting to follow her into the pool, with their swords, and Vrihan yelling at the entrance of the room. "Catch her! If you let her die here or escape, I'll kill you!" Cassandra glared at him, and kept walking and swimming inside the water. Once in her element, she had a big advantage in speed over the soldiers chasing her. None of those men were good swimmers, and with their heavy armors, each step was a struggle. For Cassandra, however, she was faster than on the ground. "Don't you dare!" yelled Vrihan. Oh, yes, she would dare to. Cassandra was almost at the wall's end, at the great opening towards the waterfall, when she heard a loud growl. She retreated just in time, as the red dragon's head appeared. Thankfully, she had seen how far Cray was able to reach inside and had evaluated right. The red dragon was smaller than the black one, but it encountered the same problem. Only its head could fit in. That saved Cassandra's life. However, with Vrihan behind her, and his dragon guarding the exit and the waterfall, she was trapped inside the water, with the soldiers closing in on her. Cassandra hesitated. Should she dive in? Cray couldn't find her in the water, but if that dragon decided to attack blindly, her chances to go unnoticed were not that high. She had to make a decision, and quickly. She knew she couldn't go back anyway. She had to try. Don't you dare! You! Cassandra dove beneath the water before hearing Vrihan's curse. Like her people, she had the peculiar ability to see underwater and keep her eyes open without trouble. Hence, as soon as she dived in, she saw how deep she could go, and where the large claws of the red dragon were resting. However, as she had predicted, he started moving as soon as she disappeared. She could see his fangs and claws attacking blindly, making waves underwater. Cassandra tried to stay away for a while, but she couldn't stay underwater for too long, and her pursuers were still coming. To her surprise, the baby dragon suddenly appeared next to her. It tilted its head, and she realized, just like her, it had no problem seeing or swimming underwater. Was it because of her? Did the silver dragon get some of her characteristics? Was that possible? Cassandra didn't have much time to wonder, though. While the baby dragon was comfortably swimming around, the bigger, older version was furiously looking for them. Cassandra took her little dagger out. They had to secure their way out, one way or another. If she could get the timing right. Next to her, the silver baby dragon suddenly stopped swimming around, too, fixated on the red dragon's movements, agitating like a cat about to jump. That's when Cassandra decided to attack. Judging its position from those large paws, she waited for the next attack, and just when its maw appeared in the water next to her, she jumped with her blade to attack. She got the red dragon right in the eye, and on the other side, the baby dragon jumped too. Both Vrihan and his dragon screeched in pain. She saw the red dragon panic, moving recklessly, and suddenly, one of its claws brutally scratched her arm. Cassandra didn't have time to scream in pain. Taking a deep breath, she dived right back in, and this time swam to the edge. She felt the border and jumped over. This was the craziest thing she had ever done in her entire life. She felt the water rushing all around her, and for a second, she thought she was jumping to her death. She could literally smash herself on the soil or hit the surface brutally. However, as she arrived towards the end of her fall, she felt something pulling her dress, and her fall was slowed down. She couldn't see, but she heard the baby dragon's flapping wings, and they both dived into the river underneath a second later. Her fall hadn't been nearly as brutal as she had imagined, but it took her a second to find her way up. She broke the surface, and caught a new, deep breath of fresh air, swimming away from the waterfall. Cassandra hadn't jumped into the unknown. She had visited Diamond City enough to know that the waterfall ended at a river, and that the river was large and big enough. Struggling a bit, she kept swimming, using the strength of the current to spare her strength a little. She had to get out of the water quickly, though. She could hear the dragon still screeching in pain, far above her head. It may have gone blind, but it still had its nose to find her. After she felt like the river had taken her far enough, and she was out of strength, Cassandra swam to get out of the river. She was exhausted when she finally got on all four on the riverside. She heard the baby dragon jumping to her side, and sure enough, it walked up to her, rubbing its little head against her arm. That sensation made her smile. The silver dragon was so tiny, just a newborn, but it had just saved her life multiple times. She caressed its head. It was smaller than she had imagined, just the size of a big cat, plus its long tail. It was a bit leaner than Cray, and its wings were longer compared to its body size, too. Just as she was taking a minute to caress the baby dragon, and catch her breath, she felt a sharp pain between her ribs. "Oh, God!" she whimpered. She knew it would come soon, now that the baby dragon had hatched, but she didn't expect it that soon. Cassandra took a deep breath and got up. She still wasn't safe. She was on the outskirts of the Diamond City, but Vrihan would send for a search party soon enough, and she couldn't stay around. Moreover, she had to find Miss Andra. She had no idea where the secret passage had taken her younger sister. Cassandra tried to think of where Miss Andra would go. Surely, she wouldn't leave without her, but where could she wait for her? The two sisters had gone to the Diamond City several times in those last weeks, they both knew this city well. Where could they meet up? As she started walking towards the city, out of strength, the rain started falling heavily. Cassandra was grateful. This would make her harder to find. However, she still had no idea where to go. Miss Andra had a few favorite shops inside the Diamond City, but there was no way Cassandra was going to find her in time if she had to search through all of them. Cassandra kept walking until she reached the first houses, and hid against the walls, hoping the roofs could keep her safe from the rain. The baby dragon was following her closely, rubbing its back against her ankles so she could feel it being here from time to time. However, Cassandra was out of strength. She was absolutely exhausted, devastated by Dahlia's death, and desperate to find Miss Andra. Yet, just when she thought she was going to pass out, she heard a door opening nearby. By the great dragon! It's really her! What are you waiting for? Go help her! A man ran to Cassandra's side, and before she could even react, she was taken inside a house. The baby dragon followed her from afar, growling at the humans, but not sure if it should attack or not. It watched Cassandra being taken inside a large room and sat on a bed by the man who had taken her inside. Cassandra was having a hard time understanding what was going on. She was on the verge of collapsing. "My sister. I need to find my sister," she whispered. "Don't worry, Your Highness, we will look for her. Son, go spread the word." Cassandra heard a door open and close, and a young woman gently helped her lie down. She felt a wet towel on her forehead, and someone helped her take her dress off. She had no strength to resist while two women helped her change into some other clothes. "Mother, she has a fever." "My baby," said Cassandra. "Don't worry, Your Highness," said one of the young women. "We will take good care of you, and we will find Lady Miss Andra, too. You're safe with us. Please just rest, you are safe here." Cassandra nodded. She really was too weak to protest. So many things had happened, she just wanted to lie down. She could feel another contraction, which worried her. She had felt some in the past few days, but never as strong as this one. She knew it was a sign. My baby. I felt. Did your water break? Mother. I think she's in labor. Cassandra felt someone sit at the end of the bed and examine her. The baby dragon jumped next to her, between her shoulder and her face, and growled a bit, as a warning. She still has time, she doesn't seem to be having too many contractions for now. You should rest, Your Highness. Try to sleep a little while we look for Lady Miss Andra. You'll wake up when the labor starts for real. Don't worry, Your Highness, repeated the woman next to her, gently caressing her wet hair. We will take care of you, said the other, covering her with a blanket. Just like that, Cassandra couldn't resist anymore and fell asleep. It was another sharp pain that woke Cassandra up. She frowned and opened her eyes, her hands going unconsciously to her belly. A part of her had to touch it, make sure her baby was still there. She was cold and afraid, but she could feel her belly. However, the first sensation that reassured her was the warm little body curled up against her cheek. Hainu. Are you awake? Miss Andra was next to her, holding her hand with a worried expression. Cassandra frowned, confused. It took her a few seconds to remember everything that had happened. She felt like she had slept too profoundly to reconnect with reality, as if she had just had a terrible nightmare where dreams and reality merged. However, reality was quick to catch her. She realized it hadn't been a nightmare, but the sad truth, when she saw the unfamiliar surroundings. They were in a common house, with a lot of people moving around. Cassandra, still lying down on some bed, turned her head. A little group was there. Women and men, several adults of all ages, all watching her with worried expressions. Miss Andra was quick to explain to her. Apparently, you arrived here about an hour ago, drenched. Those nice people found you and brought you here. They changed your clothes, too, and you fell asleep right away. You have a fever, but you are fine. We are safe here for now. I was hiding in the market, but all the inhabitants spread the word that you were looking for me, so I was able to come here a few minutes ago. How are you? Is that, the baby dragon is? Cassandra nodded, lifting her hand to caress the little one next to her. With Miss Sandra's help, she sat up, still feeling tired. So she had slept only an hour? The baby dragon immediately walked to her side, rubbing its head against her hip. Cassandra caressed the young creature and stared at the people around them. I don't understand. I remember someone pulling me here. An old woman nodded and stepped forward. We heard something was going on in the Diamond Palace, my lady. We all know that the relationships are bad between the Diamond Lady and the second prince. So, when the word was spread that they had come to arrest the war god's concubine, we knew something was wrong. We hoped the Diamond Lady could do something, but when my son spotted you, all alone on the city border, we immediately brought you here to hide you. The soldiers are searching for you, I mean for us, said Miss Andra. That crazy prince is furious you escaped. What happened? Waterfall. I escaped through the waterfall. You jumped from that height while pregnant? Are you crazy? Miss Andra, we don't have time for that, ugh. Cassandra grimaced, holding her stomach. Her contractions were getting more intense. She took deep breaths, while the young woman brought her some warm tea. "The baby dragon being here means you're going into labor?" asked Miss Andra, visibly worried. "Cassandra, the soldiers are searching for us everywhere. If they hear of a woman giving birth..." Cassandra nodded. This was the worst possible situation. She had made it out of the Diamond Palace, but the prince would do anything to find her. He was going to search every house in the Diamond City for sure. Cassandra turned to the old woman. "Thank you for helping us, but we can't stay. If they find us here, you will be punished too." The old woman shook her head. "Your Highness, we know who we are saving here. You're the Lady of the Mountain. Do you know how many of our sons have gone to the war in the East? You have no idea how everyone felt here when we heard the Lady of the Mountain and the Diamond Lady were sending those survival kits to the front. Concubines caring about soldiers. We already knew our Diamond Lady was one very strong and brave woman, but to hear that the war god's concubine was a healer, and doing what she could for our families. My brother and my husband were summoned to go to war, Your Highness," added one of the young women behind her. "I'm fearing every day that they won't return, my lady, but not being able to do anything was the worst. When we heard what you were doing from the Diamond Palace, everyone started working to send what we could to the front." "That's right," added another woman. "We prepared packages of food, and started cultivating the same medicinal herbs as you, Your Highness." Cassandra was astonished to hear all that. She had no idea so much was going on in the Diamond City recently. She had noticed that people were respecting her a lot when she would go out with Lady Karine, but she thought that was because of her status as a concubine, not because of her actions. The old woman bowed politely. "Your Highness, there is no one in this city who isn't ready to protect you. I can tell you that absolutely no one will talk if the soldiers interrogate them. We have our own dignity as the Diamond citizens. You have worked hard to help our sons that were sent to war, Your Highness. Now let us help you." Cassandra was on the verge of tears, listening to the old woman's words. She couldn't believe it. She had never imagined that the Diamond City's people were aware of her actions, let alone that they respected her that much. Cassandra knew very well how feared the Imperial family usually was, but now, she was surprised how she had even made such a strong impression on those people without having ever met them. Miss Andra, too, was blushing a bit and exchanged a look with her sister. "We are very grateful that you are all willing to help us, but this prince is really crazy. Even if no one talks, he will search everywhere for my sister. If she is about to give birth here, even with the rain, the baby's cries will be heard outside." One of the middle-aged women stepped forward. "Don't worry, Lady Miss Andra, we have already come up with a plan. This is our city, we know where we can hide the young concubine where they won't find her, or hear the baby. We will also distract them," added one of the young women. "The word is already spreading to keep the soldiers busy in another part of the city. Our neighbors went to signal a woman in a pink dress fleeing on the other side of the city. We actually did take your dress to make a decoy, Your Highness, I hope you don't mind." Cassandra was speechless. She had slept for a mere hour, and so much had happened already? They had sent a decoy with her dress. How many risks were those people willing to take for her? She wanted to protest, but another contraction came, and she had to stay quiet for it to pass. "Thank you so much," said Miss Andra in her stead. "So, where do you think you can hide my sister? We are almost done preparing." That's when Cassandra noticed. Aside from the 4 women, there were 2 teenagers, twin boys from what she could see, and one older man behind them, getting a whole bunch of things ready on the table. It looked like they were packing things in big bags. There was a bit of food, but mostly blankets and tissues, a couple of bowls and basins, even some baby clothes. "I will accompany you with my youngest daughter and my niece, Your Highness," said the old woman. "I have been a midwife for 40 years, I can help you give birth safely to the little prince." "We will take good care of you," promised one of the young women behind her. "The young ones will just help us carry everything and go back to make sure no one follows us." "Where are we going?" asked Miss Andra. "You'll like it, young lady," said the old woman with a wink. Miss Andra and Cassandra exchanged a look, but after that, there wasn't much time left to wonder. In a few more minutes, the 5 women and the young twins were ready to leave. Cassandra realized how careful they were. First, in a short time span, there were no less than 5 young people, from children to teenagers, who came and went to the house to let them know how things were going, where the soldiers and the dragon were focused on. Cassandra realized how close all of the inhabitants were to be working together like this. They were sending the young ones from one house to another to relay the information, making sure the information traveled through short distances to not catch someone's attention. No soldier would care about young people running around in their own city. They were so busy interrogating the adults that they didn't care for the kids rushing in and out. Hence, they made sure the soldiers were really busy elsewhere and proceeded to move Cassandra and Miss Andra quickly from one house to another. The 2 sisters had changed clothes and left behind any piece of jewelry or piece of clothing they were wearing previously, to hide their smell. Even the baby dragon was carefully hidden in a basket, carried by one of the teenage boys as it would have been too heavy for the women. Cassandra, staying next to it, kept tucking the little blanket around it to keep it hidden. The baby dragon was very curious and kept trying to pop its head or tail out. Cassandra was most scared that it would make a sound or growl. She didn't know how the red dragon's hearing was, and even with the rain, everyone was very careful to move around silently until they reached another house. However, the one Cassandra had found herself in was already very close to the border, and to her surprise, she found they were headed right back to the waterfall. Their little group moved very carefully until they reached the house closest to the waterfall. Then, they left it and went next to the Diamond Palace's wall. Though, instead of going for the entrance, they were headed in the completely opposite direction, towards the forest. They stayed almost against the wall, off-road, everyone checking the sky from time to time with the fear of spotting a dragon's silhouette. Finally, the old woman suddenly turned right, and Miss Andra was shocked for a second, as it seemed she had disappeared between the rocks. However, it soon appeared that there was an entrance there, to a cave. Miss Andra was speechless. Only a local could indeed know about this little cave. The Diamond Palace was old, but so were its foundations. Everything had been built on large rocks, and with the waterfall and the river crossing the Diamond Palace, it appeared that some natural caves had appeared underneath. Cassandra was astonished. This natural cathedral of stones was gorgeous. After walking for a while, the roof was getting higher and higher above them, and they almost couldn't hear any more of the rain. Instead, Cassandra realized that they were walking around the actual waterfall. She would have never imagined there was a large cave hidden behind that waterfall. The floor was actually half little lakes, half rocks. It was rather flat, and completely safe for everyone to move around. Hence, when they reached a large area, the young women and teenagers immediately worked together to unpack everything. "This is incredible," whispered Cassandra, still in awe of this cavern. "Isn't it?" replied the old woman. "No soldier from the capital would know of this place, we only show our young ones when they are old enough. It's a secret of the Diamond People. In times of war, people would come and seek refuge here, many, many years ago, when the Dragon Empire didn't yet own the land completely. Nowadays it's just for young ones to bathe in the lakes, and lovers to hide." Cassandra was indeed amazed. With the waterfall a few meters away, it would definitely cover any sound better than the rain outside. It was noisy even from where she was. In front of her, the Diamond People were carefully laying several blankets on the ground, boiling some water with what they had brought, and preparing everything for the birth of her son. Cassandra was overwhelmed with emotions. This was nothing like she could ever have imagined. In her imagination, she would have been in one of the Diamond Palace's bedrooms, with her prince holding her hand. Now, she was hiding several meters underneath, with complete strangers who were doing all they could to help her and her baby. Another contraction came, and Cassandra had no choice but to lay down, helped by the young women present. Miss Andra immediately sat by her side, taking a deep breath. "Everything will be fine, Hainu," she whispered. "You and your baby will be blessed by the water god, giving birth under a waterfall." Cassandra chuckled and nodded. "You know, my baby was conceived during a snowstorm. And now he will be born under a waterfall. Isn't it amazing?" The baby dragon suddenly jumped out of the basket with a cute little squeak, catching everyone's attention. It looked around, but its little paws were naturally taking it to Cassandra. It walked up to her and curled up by her side. Cassandra caressed the silver scales, taking a big breath. "I'm so sorry their father can't be here," she whispered. Miss Andra shook her head and grabbed Cassandra's hand. "Don't worry. With this crazy family of yours, I bet your baby will be big enough to kick his own dad for missing this in no time." Cassandra laughed, but just as she did, another contraction came, and she grimaced instead. The teenagers soon left, as they had planned, and they were left with the old woman, her daughter, and her niece, all getting ready to help Cassandra give birth. "I don't even know your names," said Cassandra, a bit sorry for not asking earlier. "This old woman is named Chantra, Your Highness. Those two young beauties are Eliane, my daughter, and Sunal, my niece. Now, let's take deep breaths and focus on this baby. We have a little prince to take care of." The cries of the newborn echoed inside the cave's walls. "The little prince is born, Your Highness." Cassandra was exhausted. She had no idea how long it had been, or how exhausted she truly was, but the cries of the baby were all she needed to hear. It took a few more minutes for them to clean the newborn and Cassandra to catch her breath, but then she could finally relax, and that's when she saw him. The old lady put the baby in his mother's arms. He was carefully wrapped in a blanket and had already stopped crying. Cassandra was amazed. Her son. Karen's newborn son. The baby she had carried for months, was finally in her arms. He was so small. Compared to his father, he was so tiny and fragile, just a defenseless newborn. His skin was still a bit pinkish, but she could tell he had gold-colored skin, a perfect mix between hers and the Dragon Empire's tan. He already had a little bit of hair, a dark patch on his tiny head. She couldn't tell his eye color yet. It seemed dark, but her baby was barely opening his eyes, just squirming a little in his blanket. Next to Cassandra, the baby dragon stood up, staring at the baby, and rubbed its head against Cassandra's arm. Was it curious about its other half? Or maybe a bit jealous to not be in Cassandra's arms? She couldn't tell. The bond between those two was so unique. "He is so tiny," whispered Miss Andra next to her, staring at the baby in awe. "He's actually quite big for a newborn, Lady Miss Andra," said Chantra with a smile. "Are you all right, Your Highness?" Cassandra nodded, but she was absolutely mesmerized by the sight of her son. She had never thought such a precious existence could even be in her life one day. She had dreamed of having children and a loving husband one day, but nothing could compare to this feeling. It was her baby. This little, precious being she had created, with Karen's love and hers. She gently kissed the baby's forehead, and he moved a bit, reacting to her touch. Cassandra smiled. She was glad he was finally born safely, the baby dragon as well. Despite the circumstances, it was all that mattered. While the women were cleaning everything, Miss Andra stayed by her side, looking at her newborn nephew, amazed. "He is really cute. Have you thought of a name already? For the baby dragon, too?" Cassandra nodded. "I discussed it a bit with Lady Karine before. I wanted something that resembled his father's name and mine, like the Dragon Empire tradition, and yet was inspired by our Rain tribe. His name is Cashin." "Oh. You're writing it with their letters, then?" "Yes. And this little one here?" The baby dragon squealed when Cassandra caressed its head, growling softly as Cray would. "This little dragon is Kian." Miss Andra chuckled. "Kian? It's rather cute. It suits him. Actually, it suits them both. Cashin and Kian." Cassandra chuckled, caressing the baby dragon's head. It was so similar to Cray's build, but a bit thinner, and a magnificent silver color. Its emerald eyes were like big jewels, too, making it cuter than the adult dragons. Cassandra was exhausted after giving birth, but she couldn't forget about their current situation. They had been hidden in this cave for several hours. The teenage boys had come back twice to give them information about the situation outside. As she had expected, the second prince was absolutely furious. His men were raiding the Diamond City, looking everywhere for her, searching every house, and threatening people. As Chantra had promised, none of the villagers would tell them a thing about the young concubine hidden behind the waterfall. However, Cassandra knew it wouldn't be that easy. While the three women were busy cleaning their hands nearby and chatting about how to go back without being noticed, the two sisters exchanged a look. "How did you manage to leave?" asked Miss Andra. "You said you jumped from this crazy waterfall. Is Lady Kareen all right?" "They caught me right after you left. Princess Fitra was there, too." "That crazy. They didn't hurt you, did they? How did you escape then?" Cassandra took a deep breath. "Miss Andra, I need to tell you something." The younger sister frowned. "What is it?" "When they caught me, Fitra tried to attack me. Dahlia got between us, and she—" "Miss Andra, Dahlia was killed." Her sister stayed speechless for a moment, completely shocked. Cassandra knew this was a huge toll for her. The two girls had bonded a lot in the last few weeks, and even Cassandra herself still couldn't believe this had happened. Miss Sandra's lower lip trembled. What? "Miss Andra, I am so sorry. Fitra killed her while she tried to protect me." "Are you sure she's—" Cassandra nodded. There was no way Dahlia had survived. Cassandra even suspected the poor girl was already dead when she had fled the scene. Miss Andra took a deep breath in, shaking her head. Cassandra could tell she was trying hard not to break down. A few tears ran down her sister's eyes, as Miss Andra nodded frenetically. I see. Miss Andra, I'm sorry." "Why are you the one being sorry? Dahlia tried to protect you from those monsters, Hainu. Don't be sorry when she died to protect you. You should be sorry those people aren't paying a heavy price for that now." How did all of this even happen? Everything was fine just hours ago." Cassandra still couldn't believe everything that had happened, either. It felt unreal. She couldn't understand why she was a suspect in Prince Saphir's death, or why the Emperor would send Vrihan to get her. The old Emperor definitely knew what was going on between the second and third princes. Why would he send Vrihan, of all people? Something didn't feel right about all of this. "For once, I wish Lady Sherian or the prince were here to slaughter them," growled Miss Andra. "Those horrible siblings deserve worse than death. Even the god of death ripping their limbs apart would not be enough." Cassandra wished Karen or his sister were there, too. She missed her prince more than ever. His baby was brought to this world, and they were already in so much danger. Had Cray felt the egg hatching? Was the black dragon on the way back already? The latest news they got from Lady Kareen was not too bad. Her medical kits helped the war efforts a lot, but there was no clue about the war god being able to leave the front. Karen was probably fighting on the very front line, not the kind of place one could walk away from just like that. Cassandra didn't even know if any of her letters got to him. Probably some general was collecting them halfway, but there was no way to call him there now. Either way, the young concubine had to accept the fact that she would have to survive without her prince's protection for now. "Where do we go, now?" sighed Miss Andra. "We can't go back to the Diamond Palace or the Diamond City. This horrible prince is already everywhere looking for you, and that horrible dragon of his too. Shall we go to the Onyx Castle you had mentioned? You should be safe there, no? We can try to hide while we travel to the north." "No," replied her older sister, shaking her head. "That will be the first place Vrihan will look for me. He will definitely send men to all the routes to the north, thinking I'll be seeking Sherian's help. But Lady Sherian will know of the situation by now, won't she? If we just waited a bit longer. Lady Karine said Sherian would be coming in a few days, but we can't wait that long. The longer we stay here, the more we put these people in danger. Even if these people are very nice, there is no guarantee one of them won't give up and talk about this waterfall. Plus, they will need to do a lot of traveling from here to the city to bring us necessities. What if Rihan or his dragon find us before Lady Sherian arrives? We can't stay hidden here, and we cannot do nothing either. Plus, I'm worried Lady Sherian might not be able to stop Rihan and Fitra, even if she comes here. He's a prince after all. What then? Miss Andra was really worried. She understood Cassandra's reasoning, but how far could they go with a newborn baby and her sister who had just given birth? Moreover, a baby dragon wasn't small enough to be hidden so easily. We can't stay here. I escaped the palace from this very waterfall. We are so close. If they think about checking nearby they might find us just like that. Even in Diamond City, they will keep looking through every house to find me. They know Lady Karine's people would help me. No, I think we should head to the capital. The capital? Are you crazy? Vrihan already controls everything there. That's exactly why. First, he won't expect us to go there. Secondly, we both have friends who can help us once we reach the capital. Also, my priority, for now, is to see if the Emperor is fine, and find out what happened there. I don't believe the Emperor sent Vrihan to catch me. I think there's something going on. Don't you think it is strange that Princess Fitra is here too? Now that you mention it. Wasn't that supposed to be imprisoned or married? Exactly. Something doesn't feel right about all this. I don't understand why the Emperor would even allow them to be here, and I'm worried something happened in the capital. I need to check if the Emperor is okay, and also, he's the only one, other than Karen, who can stop Vrihan. But Lady Sherian, maybe with Prince Anur. We don't know if Anur will come with her, Miss Andra, and even if he does, I doubt he can stop Vrihan. He's less than half his age, and certainly not as cunning as Vrihan. Even Lady Karine wasn't able to oppose him. I really have a bad feeling about everything going on. We can't risk staying here. We don't know exactly when Lady Sherian will be here, if she will be able to stop them from capturing me, and they can find us any minute. Miss Andra kept shaking her head, thinking this was a terrible idea. It felt like going straight into the snake's nest instead of running away. However, Cassandra had never looked so determined. Maybe it was because she had just become a mother, with a baby to protect, or because she was pushed to her last resort, but her older sister looked stronger than ever before. Listen, Miss Andra. We need to get out of this territory unnoticed. You and I both know how to survive in the wild, and with a young dragon with us, we won't have to worry about predators. You're saying we should travel off-road? Exactly. There are mostly forests from here to the capital, and it's less than a week's journey if we walk fast, this way. Prince Vrihan won't think 2 women and a baby will make it without traveling through the usual routes. He will have every road checked. As long as we can get far enough from Diamond City, he won't know how we got away, and we will be able to rest in smaller cities and villages." Miss Andra nodded, understanding Cassandra's plan. The two of them kept talking for a while, thinking of how to secure their escape and go unnoticed. Chantra, and her daughter and niece had listened to everything and stepped in. "Are you sure you will be all right, Your Highness? I wish there was something more we could do for you." "Actually, you can," said Miss Andra, determined. She took out her knife and, without warning, suddenly cut off her long hair, leaving only a very short bob cut. Cassandra was speechless, but just like her, Miss Andra was determined. She watched the big strand in her hand, still tied in a braid, and nodded before giving it to the woman. "This is almost the same color as my sister's, they won't be able to tell the difference. Disperse this in the north, in the river or the forest, anywhere as long as they end up finding it and think we went there." "Miss Andra. It's just hair," she said, turning to her sister. "I don't care at all." "I get your point, Cassandra. But this time, it's my turn to protect you, okay? If there's one thing I'm good at, it's tricking people. I promise I'll get us out of here." Chapter 19. The large, black dragon growled furiously, its claws ripping the soil and killing several soldiers, grasped or crushed underneath. The beast was roaming furiously among the ranks of the enemy, dispersing them. The soldiers of the Eastern Republic kept spreading around it to try and attack. They would do anything they could to get to the black scales, but it was an impenetrable armor. No blades or arrows could pierce the thick-skinned creature. The only thing that worked was the catapults. The heavy rocks thrown at the black dragon would be like stones annoying it, pissing it off even more. The dragon would focus on destroying those annoying machines, then move on to the next group of soldiers it could find. It was impractical for such a large-sized creature to be fighting in a city. Cray was left to unleash its fury at the border, using claws and fangs to tear the enemy apart, and its growl to terrorize the enemy. The border to the city of Dagaria had been the theater of this war for 3 days now. The war god's arrival had been a huge relief to the Dragon Empire's people. His accomplishments preceded the man. Not only were all the citizens well aware of his past accomplishments, but for several weeks, the Empire's favorite prince had been freeing one city after another. The Eastern Army had made great progress long before the news reached the capital. The lack of communication to the Imperial Palace had been a fatal flaw that had given them a considerable advantage. The Eastern Army had taken several cities by surprise. Acting under the cover of night, they knew exactly where to strike, getting rid of officials and messengers, thanks to the secret information they had obtained, and they had secured their new locations one after another. It had been almost too easy for the army. This attack had been carefully prepared. After years and years of feeding their hatred against the barbaric Dragon Empire, the Eastern soldiers were almost too eager when the order had finally been given. Following the commander's plan to the letter, they had made tremendous progress, one city after another. The hired mercenaries and assassins raided the cities, getting rid of the people in charge, and the soldiers arrived next to definitely capture the city or village. It was almost too easy. The army posted there had shown close to no resistance, completely taken by surprise. All the men were captured, some tortured publicly to scare the locals. Women and children who didn't resist were captured and sent to the Eastern Republic to work as prisoners. The news of the Dragon Empire's war god's arrival had changed things. The Eastern Army had stopped their progression right away, and instead, focused on taking full control of all of the acquired cities, gathering the men, equipment, and resources to stage a siege. They already knew the war god's dragon wouldn't fire inside of a city, so they thought they could resist the Imperial army's arrival. They were wrong. The war god was not someone they should have underestimated, especially not when he was guiding the Dragon Empire's most powerful army. The first city where the two armies had met was the least consolidated, yet the Eastern Army had spent time getting ready for this confrontation. They had barricaded all doors, gathered the men inside the walls, and got ready to aim at the war god mostly. They had been defeated in 2 days. The men were already scared from hearing of the war god's arrival, with his terrifying dragon, but seeing this man in person had been a terrible experience. He had arrived on foot, and upon facing the door that kept him out of the city, he hadn't stopped. They had tried everything. Arrows, blades, even little fireballs. Nothing had stopped him. At best, they had scratched him, only to watch the scar turn black from afar. Someone had screamed he was a scaled beast, but they weren't sure. The real nightmare had occurred when the war god had used his bare hands to tear the door down. That's right, the heavily barricaded door hadn't stood more than 10 long, painful minutes. That human monster had torn the thick wood apart like one would rip a paper sheet. Many men had been absolutely terrorized by those hands' power. A dragon's strength could be understood by its size and species. This man, however, didn't belong to the human realm. There was no other explanation but that prince being a demigod. The Eastern Army had understood for the first time the heavy reality of a man nicknamed the war god by its own people. As soon as Karen was in sight, their fate was sealed. The Eastern Army would not give up on their position easily, but the mere sight of the black armor of the war god was enough to petrify a lot of men. His dark eyes showed no mercy to his enemies. The men were falling one after another, killed like fleas in his path. One single man was leading the Dragon Empire army with so much assurance that it took a lot of resolve for the Eastern Army leaders to not surrender. They had orders coming from their own capital, but the politicians had no front seat for this. The only thing saving them was the time they had won ahead. Being able to secure their positions in the Dragon Empire's own city guaranteed a bit of restraint from the enemy soldiers. They didn't want to destroy the houses or harm the locals, unlike the Eastern soldiers who didn't care at all. Even the war god, known to be the most merciless, wouldn't harm any woman or child that got in his way. That was surprising, considering the extreme violence that man displayed to get rid of his enemies. Karen was enraged by this war. It was taking too long. He knew the fault didn't reside in the generals accompanying him or his men. All the military officers agreed that the late start in this war put them at a major disadvantage. Freeing a city was much more complicated than fighting an army on a proper battlefield. The fights were taking place all over the city, and their population was caught in it, often used as hostages as well. It wasn't a situation that could be resolved by brute force alone. The generals were doing their best, but it took time to solve each conflict. Anywhere the war god went, things were settled quickly. However, there was only one war god of the Dragon Empire, and the man couldn't be everywhere. The days were inevitably long, and the longer the war went on, the more the men were exhausted. Though the war god's presence was the main source of comfort for the Imperial army, who knew they wouldn't lose this battle with such a commander, the biggest relief came from elsewhere. Several weeks after the beginning of the war, messengers came from the back of the army to let the generals know the Lady of the Mountain and the Diamond Lady were sending medical supplies. The officials were astonished. Since when did women bother about matters of war? However, when the promised medical kits had arrived a few days later, they were speechless. Everything sent was ready to use, and practical. The generals were totally baffled, except for one of them, who had been dispatched from the north. That old general knew the Lady of the Mountain, the war god's favorite, the only lady who cared enough about this war to fight with them. There wasn't much to argue about anyway. Those medical kits had come at a good time to raise the morale of the troops, and the Lady of the Mountain wasn't only a high-ranked concubine, she was named Imperial physician by the Emperor himself. It was enough for all the supplies to be sent everywhere on the battlefield. Karen only got to see those kits a couple of days later. The war god had barely rested since the beginning of this war. Returning to a battlefield after such a long time was actually refreshing. Karen stood at the very front of the battle, slaughtering one man after another, sometimes fighting several at a time. He had gotten a few injuries, but nothing his dragon blood couldn't heal. Instead, he was actually frustrated at his dragon, getting impatient outside of the city. Cray was forbidden to fire or enter the cities, but the dragon was keeping itself busy by clearing the grounds around it. If any Eastern soldier had a bad idea of trying to run from the city, he was greeted right away by a wide-open mouth, and quick death. However, this wasn't where both the dragon and the prince wanted to be at this moment. They were all longing for a different city, a different company. This fact made Cray irritable, and the dragon was even harder to keep in check. The prince was well aware of his conflicted feelings, but there was nothing that could be done about it. His duties came first, and only when this war was over could he go back to his beloved Cassandra. "What is this?" he asked as one of his soldiers had taken out a little box to try and save his injured peer. "The medicinal kits from the Diamond Palace, Commander. They were distributed last night to all the men at the front." While the man was wrapping an injury, Karen observed the little box. He recognized the familiar smell of medicine and plants. Cassandra's hair always smelled the same after she had spent time in her garden. A little smile appeared on the war god's face, terrorizing the men around. The war god, smiling? What kind of crazy demon was awake now? The commander turned around, swinging his swords with a smirk that wouldn't leave his face. So she had decided to do something, as well. It was so like her to refuse to stay put. A proud feeling spreading in his chest, the war god worked even harder at clearing the city, only resting when he absolutely had to. He even made sure to send some men literally flying, where the dragon could catch them in one bite. However, it wasn't enough. More precisely, something was wrong about this whole war. He had felt it since the beginning. The information had come too late to the palace, and the Eastern Army was well too informed. They had known how and where to strike to get a considerable advantage ahead of them. This was not a simple coincidence. Karen immediately informed his generals that he wanted them to capture officials, and make them spill about the rat that had sold the information. He wouldn't let them get away with this. Finally, in the next city they freed, they captured the right man to interrogate. Truth was, the poor fellow was about to meet a tragic fate. The war god was annoyed. This war had been going on for several weeks, more than he had promised already. He wanted to get things done quickly, and this man was the one who was about to receive his anger. Karen walked into one of the houses used as a headquarters of the front. Two generals to the side, one accountant, and two soldiers holding their prisoner on his knees. "Talk," said the war god, as cold as ice. The man may have kept his tongue tied, in other circumstances. If the war god hadn't been absolutely terrifying, in his black armor and murderous eyes, for example. The man was shivering, already exhausted by the fights, and the struggle he had put into not being captured. "I know nothing. One of his legs was loudly broken. The man screamed in pain, but no one else flinched. The men present were all highly trained, and would not offend their commander with any mistake. "Last chance," warned Karen. We got the information from here." A messenger arrived with a lot of information. Our king agreed to his terms. "Who was that?" asked Karen. "I don't know. I really don't know. They only said if we could kill the war god and his army, the new emperor would give us all the south and north territories, and 100 chests of gold." Karen glared even more. Some rat had sold out his own empire for his head. "Who is that new emperor they talked about?" roared one of the generals. "How dare they, when our beloved Imperial dragon is still healthy as a young dragon?" "How dare they, indeed," said Karen. The prince took out his sword, and with one blow, sent the prisoner's head flying. "Your Highness! That man might have had more information." Karen didn't answer and left the building without explanation. He didn't care about the prisoner. He already knew this rat would have been way too smart to leave any information behind. The faster way was to send word to his father, and end things quickly here. He looked down at all the blood dripping off his armor. The black metal had turned a reddish, horrid color over the last few days. Karen didn't even have time to wash it. He looked around him. The fight was dying. The remaining Eastern Army soldiers were all killed or taken as prisoners by his men. To his surprise, the city people had even helped a bit, providing food and shelter to the soldiers who needed it. This was a first for the Imperial Army. Aside from the capital, most cities were terrified by the Emperor's army. They had never seen the Imperial military, aside from their own city militia, and the rumors about the Imperial family held everyone in fear. However, Karen himself had been surprised to see how things had changed lately. First, the news of him freeing the previous city was enough to have the war god's arrival celebrated whenever they reached another one. Plus, he didn't know how, but the people already knew that, unlike the Eastern Army who did not care, the war god forbade his men from assaulting or injuring any women or children. That was enough to have all the locals support the Imperial Army anywhere they showed up. Cassandra's shadow was also everywhere. Not only were the soldiers delighted by the medical kits that had already saved many lives, but the story of a former slave turned concubine and an imperial physician was running like a legend in the streets. As soon as they saw the medical kits, the common people treated it like a treasure, looking incredibly grateful when the soldiers used it on the innocent people who had been injured. Strangely, Karen was feeling incredibly proud of his concubine's doings. It was as if Cassandra was there on the battlefield, supporting him with her own strength. As he walked back to the little building where his army had established themselves during this battle, he witnessed more soldiers using the little kits, now perfectly familiar with all the contents. He had even seen some of his men discussing with the accountants and the men watching the supplies about what they were running out of the fastest, and using the empty compartments to store food. "Are you all right, Your Highness?" asked one of the generals as Karen walked in the building. Of course, he was all right. He didn't bother to answer and instead, took off his bloodied armor. His bare torso was perfectly fine except for a couple of scratches. Karen walked upstairs, finding the little room they had prepared quickly for him. The war god could only afford to take short naps, but this was plenty enough for him. He laid on the bed, but instead of trying to sleep, his hand reached for the little box on the bedside table. Karen had kept one of those for himself. He probably wouldn't ever need what was inside, but having one of those boxes was meaningful enough for him. He opened it. The supplies hadn't moved, but on top of the compartments, he grabbed the letter he had already read many times. Cassandra's handwriting was pretty and delicate. As he was rereading, he touched her hair tied with his. He could easily imagine her gentle voice saying each word. The war god sighed, imagining his concubine as she wrote every line, thinking of him. He could fight 100 wars, but he never would have imagined that being away from her for so long would be so hard. Back at the North Army camp, he could see her at the end of the day, so he hadn't really stopped to think about even missing her. Now, this war was getting too annoyingly long, and Cassandra wasn't anywhere near. It was better this way. He didn't want to see the fear he witnessed in the innocent villager women's eyes every day, in her beautiful emerald-colored irises. She was so sick just from the smell of blood. This place would have been an utter nightmare for her. He tried sleeping for a bit, just a couple of hours. He had done most of the job in fighting off the Eastern Army. His generals were competent enough to finish whatever was left in his absence. Most of them were smart enough not to disturb the war god's few hours of rest. When Karen got up, a full plate of food was ready for him. He ate while listening to several reports, but all in all, this city was now free, and they should move on to the next one. Finally, they were about to reach the last city the Eastern Army had been able to establish a decent siege on. The final fight would occur soon, and then, he was free to go back to his concubine. Karen left the building once he was satiated, and his men were done talking. He went outside to join Cray, who was laying in the middle of an abandoned garden of a wealthy villa. That was one of the only spots large enough for the dragon to sit comfortably, as most of the city had been ravaged by the attacks. The large black dragon was obviously bored by this war. The Eastern Army had done great by locking themselves inside the city, where it was hard for him to access the narrow streets, and unless Karen and his men pushed them outside or in areas he could reach, the big dragon literally didn't have much to put its fangs or claws in. Hence, Cray was looking even more depressed and ignored the prince walking its way. "Stop sulking, we're almost done." The answer came as an angry growl. Cray turned its head away, and kept growling, terrorizing the poor soldiers who just happened to be walking by. Karen sighed and leaned against its big body. Both turned their heads in the same direction, where the Diamond Palace stood, miles and miles away. Karen promised himself to fly there the minute he would be done with this war. He had already had enough. Suddenly, Cray moved, pushing the war god and hiding its head under its black wing. Karen glared at his willful beast that was now showing him its rear. "I miss them too, you know." Another growl came. Karen couldn't blame him. They were both dying to fly back and meet their babies. His son and the baby dragon. Karen had a feeling that the birth had already happened, from the way Cray was acting. His dragon had acted all agitated, 2 nights ago, but they were right in the middle of the raging battle. However, his angry dragon's attitude had been even worse since then, and now, Karen could tell the dragon wasn't only just missing Cassandra. The war god had enough. After a few more minutes, he angrily walked back to the main building, yelling for the generals to gather. All men assembled in less than a minute. "We are attacking the next city in 2 days at dawn," he said. "Warn all the men we are taking no prisoners." No one dared to protest or even raise a single concern. 2 days would be plenty enough for the men to rest, and the next city could be reached in 2 hours by foot. One would have been crazy to object to the war god when he had this murderous glare on. He was merciless with his enemies, but his men knew Karen could be as deadly with anyone who disrespected him, too. Hence, just as the war god had ordered, the army arrived at the next city exactly before dawn, 2 days later. Just like the black dragon flying above them, the soldiers were actually quite excited. This was the last battle, and victory after victory, they had gotten to the last city needing to be freed. Even if this one would be just as heavily consolidated, the mere thought of ending this war soon was enough to energize the troops. Just like Karen, many of these men had families or lovers they were all dying to return to. As Karen stood forward, lines and lines of soldiers behind him, an Eastern soldier, probably some general, appeared on top of one of the city's walls. "Imperial Army. You have fought brilliantly until now, but we won't let you win this city. Our great Eastern Republic won't submit to some barbarian country who—" "Shut up!" The man stopped talking, shocked by the war god's words. Karen hadn't yelled, but his voice was powerful enough to be heard all around. Some men snickered behind him, making fun of the poor soldier. We are not going to step down in front of the tyranny, and I said, shut up." Some of the men behind Karen laughed at the man's baffled expression, but the war god wasn't laughing. Instead, his glare was absolutely terrifying. The poor spokesperson tried to stutter something, but it came more as some pitiful squeak than any word. It was indeed hard to dare open his mouth when being glared at by the most terrifying black eyes in the world. The most spine-chilling beast wasn't in the sky. "We don't." Karen quietly took out his sword, and in a silent deadly movement, sent it flying. The distance should have been hard to conquer, even for an arrow. However, the blade went right into that man's head, perfectly in the middle. He fell backward and out of sight. The large door stood in front of them, surely barricaded, but this was the 12th door they were facing in those few weeks. The soldiers knew exactly what to expect. Karen glanced up, waiting. The dragon kept circling lazily until the war god clicked his tongue. "The sooner we're done, the sooner we go back," he muttered, still glaring at his dragon. Just then, Cray finally flew down, apparently headed right into the door, but a few meters before, finally spit its fire. The door melted in seconds against the pressure of the heat. Even the men started sweating under their armors, but they watched the door disappear and got ready to fight. "All men, ready!" yelled the generals in unison. Karen took out his second sword, and with one swing of his hand, all the soldiers started moving at the exact same moment. The Imperial army was perfectly trained to do what they had to. The generals alone were enough to guide the men, while Karen marched in front. Anyone who got in his way wearing the wrong armor was killed instantly. Many men tried to fight him, as it would be the ultimate honor to be able to kill the Dragon Empire's war god, but they were greeted with death instead. He was like a machine. He didn't stop, didn't flinch, and kept going with nothing to stop him. Cray, too, was flying over the city, looking for any spot where it could attack and bite a few enemies. The dragon was only too happy to have an opportunity to end this war as soon as possible. It even wandered off to chase some men who were trying to flee the city, as the beast had no pity for deserters. On the ground, Karen was leading his men silently. They were barging into a building, making sure the inhabitants were safe and the enemy was killed and moved on to the next one. It was harder to progress because the Eastern Army had no remorse in taking hostages. Somehow, they had to find a way around any situation, but after 12 cities of the same scenario, all of his men were trained to act accordingly. The war god didn't even have to yell any orders. The Imperial army was the best in the empire. Instead, Karen focused on the larger buildings, or the houses where many hostages could be held. One was particularly barricaded, and he kicked the doors open. Something felt strange inside that place. It was too silent. No one had progressed that far into the city yet, but he was almost surprised no one had raided such a big mansion. Was this a possible trap? That thought wasn't worrying him one bit. He had faced countless traps and rendered all of them useless. His enemies were smart, but his strength and stamina were hard to overcome. Not only that, but his dragon blood made his enemy cry in frustration, for any injury that they barely managed to inflict onto him was absolutely useless. However, his instincts were telling him something was wrong with this place. The large rooms would have been perfect to store men or weapons, but it seemed empty. The ceiling was strangely high, too, as if one of the floors had been taken out. From the outside, the roof seemed robust, so why? The answer came a couple of rooms further in. Karen's instincts warned him first, and he placed his sword in front of him. Another trap, surely. When he kicked another door open, however, there was quite a surprise behind it. 2 young dragons, facing him with their yellow angry eyes. The 2 beasts stood still, but they were not restrained in any way. Karen frowned. The Eastern Army shouldn't have any dragons. Those 2 were unknown, he had never seen those before. They were young, obviously not adults. He swung his sword around. Finally an interesting battle. There was no record of a man able to single-handedly kill a dragon. Let alone 2 dragons. The war god had a smirk on. They had really worked hard at trying to kill him. One of the dragons suddenly growled, and they both jumped on him. The room was big but just enough for those 2 to attack. No adult dragon would be able to sneak in there, but those dragons were the size of 3 or 4 adult men, not even half of Cray's size. They really had prepared the perfect trap. Karen barely dodged one of their claws, and the other dragon furiously growled, jumping next. The war god didn't have time to think. He raised his sword and, at the right moment, stabbed one of their flanks, making the dragon screech in pain. However, right next to him, the other jumped, and tore Karen's armor off his chest in a loud metallic bang. The pieces of metal fell, with holes from its claws in it. The war god frowned. He jumped to get on one of the dragon's backs, using it as a stepping stone, and attacked the other, aiming for its jaw this time. He barely missed it, but his sword still opened a large cut on the beast's neck. Both dragons were now injured and furious, and they attacked back. The war god felt a sharp pain, and saw his blood flowing from the injury. He glanced down. How long had it been since he had seen the color of his own blood? The injury was large, and strangely, at that moment he was reminded of Cassandra. Something about the pain, maybe. He looked up, and both dragons got ready to jump again. Join our Facebook and WhatsApp group for more updates, link is given in description. Rest audiobook will be continued in next episode.